thank you so much for joining what promises to be, hopefully a very rewarding, but I would imagine quite an unnerving conversation. Now, have you ever received a voice note that didn't quite sound right, but you couldn't put your finger on why? Well, that uneasiness might soon become the new normal. Across the world and here in South Africa, cyber criminals are using artificial intelligence to clone voices, along with a few other modalities. With just a few seconds of audio, scammers can now impersonate your loved ones, your colleagues, even your favorite public personalities, and use those voices to trick you. It's called AI voice cloning. And today we are asking, can you still trust what you hear? Well, joining us for this very important and rather scary conversation are three voices that you'll definitely want to hear, and I've touched them all. They are real people, okay? Professional gamer and tech enthusiast and our good friend Grant Hines. He had a breakdown how this cloning technology works. Legal expert Nicoline Skuman-Low, who will explain where the law stands, and then Adrian Endley from Good Hope FM, who constantly changes his voice every time he's on air so that no one can copy him. He is on Radio Daily and obviously has a beautiful fan base that I would imagine would be scared by something like this as well. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Maybe I can start with you. Does this terrify you? Because you are your voice, but it's your job. This gets real very quickly, right?
Yeah, that's my bread and butter. So it is sort of scary to think that someone could just take what I'm saying right now and just sort of do their own thing with it. It makes me think, well, then what's the point of having me around then?
Come on, are you great, man?
Oh,
Stick around, man. We need him. So how does this work? Break it down for us. How is this manifesting at the moment to become such a hot talking point?
So it is quite common. You can use most recordings that you have. The quality of the recording is also what makes the quality of the AI better. And then what it does is it will assimilate your voice based on the data set that you give it, which would just usually be like a really long recording of like how you speak and how you say things. So I think public figures have a
it's quite a pool to draw from. Yeah,
that's the problem. You've got a huge bank of content over the past like 10 years. You might have you might be at risk, more at risk than
some of us have been around since the start of like TV and radio in the country. So there's a lot out there. Do I own my voice, Nicoline? Here right now on Expresso. Do I even own my voice? But out there, once I've recorded a voice note and sent it off.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's no piece of legislation that specifically attributes ownership of your voice to you or I. But I think, as with fingerprints, there's nothing specific that attributes that to us. We assume that we own our fingerprints and our voice. But if we look at how this happens, right? We've mentioned the recording. If that recording occurs without your knowledge, without your consent, it's reassembled and distributed under the Protection of Personal Information Act, or POPI, it is protected under Section 1, where we protect biometric information, which is quite a large umbrella, but voice is definitely included under under that umbrella. So if we have distribution and recording and reassembly without consent, that is unlawful processing, reportable to the information regulator.
Okay, so we've got a step to take, but whether that leads to further steps or whether, if there's a capability to deal with that. And I've sat in a police station listening to elderly couples, a slew, explaining the various ways that they had been taken advantage of in a digital space that unfortunately our police at that given moment had no idea or even where to jump off. And that terrifies me. I'm going to flip the scripture. Do you think a viewer, a listener, would hear your voice and just trust that if they had to receive a call? And it was you, it's their favorite radio guy asking them to send a donation. Come on. Does that side of this equation terrify you?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the way. I mean, look, I don't want to say I'm like a public figure or anything, but I'm a voice that hopefully people would recognize. And I think if you hear voices that you trust, especially if they have a bit more influence, you definitely will immediately think what they're saying is legit. And I think with how the technology has advanced, I think initially it sounded very clunky, very robotic almost, but if we're hearing what AI is putting out nowadays, it sounds almost exactly the same.
And of course, we're looking for a familiar voice in amongst all the generated clunky stuff. So I'm going to use one of my own experiences with Facebook. And we've spoken a lot about this, and Grant stepped in a way that to help me that I just couldn't find from the platform itself. But no representation of me on Facebook is me. It's all pirated, it's all been stolen, and now people as easily as contacting a guest that I've interviewed on the show shortly after that interview have been able to scam them, pretending to me just using comments. Now imagine my voice is laid into that. It is terrifying. how much responsibility is on the platforms to govern where this is going out? I mean, we hear this with gaming, with platforms like Roblox becoming so dangerous, taking no responsibility. Surely the same should apply here.
Look, I don't know what their legal responsibility is, especially because they're in different jurisdictions.
Sure.
But they have a responsibility, I guess, to their user base to make sure that the platform is safe, that people want to spend time there, that they can trust. If you can't trust that you are WhatsApping somebody that like your family member, what's the purpose of that platform anymore?
Exactly.
So I think they've got a responsibility to make that space valuable to the audience. There will be people that will fall by the wayside, I assume. But I guess that's tech under capitalism.
And I think that's
another problem.
I was going to say that's another frontier. But I'm thinking now we use voice authentication all the time in that legal space. How close to that line are we when it comes to the legal battle or the legal fears that are loading?
Absolutely. I agree that we've got a major jurisdictional issue to deal with this. Many of these platforms are not local, and that poses a real challenge to us from a legal perspective. But I do not think we are without recourse. We shouldn't think that. If we look back to the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act, the first generation of legislation we saw in this country to deal with online behavior, it already recognized that we needed a versatile framework. It recognized that we needed to deal with the mere conduits. In other words, we don't modify the data, we allow access and we allow transmission. And we see that under Section 77, you can actually ask for a takedown. And if the takedown doesn't occur, it does open the platform to liability.
Okay, that
we can also go to court.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I think we shouldn't think we do not have recourse. There are challenges, let's be real, but we have recourse.
I was going to, whenever you're dealing with crime, there are challenges, and that's the nature of life. I want you to think about what those first steps are in terms of keeping ourselves safe, educating others, especially our older listeners and viewers, and then what are those first steps to empower ourselves? We're going to continue this discussion. We are talking about AI, and I know there are a lot of scary new frontiers within that AI space, but this is where it's getting real very quickly every day with consumers, where voices are being copied to the point of it's pretty much your original voice being doctored. And what doors does that open? We'll continue to hopefully fortify you for the future ahead after this. I'm sorry, new fears are loading all the time here. The more I learn, so the more we need to temper that storm with the experts. And we're looking at it from a few different angles here. But when specifically dealing with voice being taken away from you and being used in nefarious ways. Okay, if your voice was cloned and used in a scam, what could you actually do about it? And would you be held liable for the outcome? Well, unfortunately for most South Africans, the answer right now is, well, we don't really know. Our laws do back us up, but they are still catching up a little bit to this fast-paced world of AI, which is changing, let's be honest, faster than any of us can keep pace. Now, voice cloning is opening new legal and ethical grey areas that we've never had to think about before. So our guests are here, and it's not all doom and gloom and deep fakes. There are some steps we can take to protect ourselves. So, Grant, I'm going to start with you. Are there apps we can use to assess this? Are there gateways that we can set in place to protect ourselves?
I think there are behavior patterns that we can do. I think always be suspicious if somebody's asking you for something, even a family member, because people behave in a certain way and you're used to them, and it'd be very strange if somebody said, hey, listen, this, like, I need some money or whatever. Then maybe video call them or go visit them in person and find out what's actually going on.
Maybe chat to your close family and friends and have a little safe word or something.
Don't take a WhatsApp message as what's going on, because our stuff is being, especially when somebody's asking for something, information or money or whatever the case is. Sometimes that's really unusual. There's usually a motive. I think the paranoia here, don't be paranoid, because that's not helpful. And there's no reason to be paranoid. People don't do this for fun. They do this because they have an intention. Okay, so I've got friends who are paranoid about this, but the intention is generally to take money. It's to get information from you. Those are the things. It's never to terrorize you. Okay. Because that's just a waste of resources for them. It's their organizations they want to steal.
Yeah, And
So-
often, I think you think it's one person's like a hacker sitting in his room somewhere. These are big syndicates that
Yeah,
are
and they're usually
representing-
shotgunning lots of people, but you think you're very important right now because it's happening to you, but as well as many, many other people.
I think, sadly, as my little story kind of highlighted for myself, the elderly get targeted. And this used to happen with mail order stuff. I would see it at my grand's retirement village, targeted because they are looking for connection, because they are looking for just a little bit of change. For anyone who experiences something like this, once we have, first of all, established that something isn't right, what is that first step?
I think we shouldn't wait for something really bad to happen.
Okay.
That's the first thing. If you know that you have been compromised in any way or your voice has been cloned, whether something nefarious has actually occurred, we should take that first step. And it really goes a long way to back yourself with cybersecurity specialists, not that expensive as many would think. Take that step early on, find out what's going on and how it actually happened and how to remediate or protect yourself. Maybe it's a system vulnerability that could be easily addressed.
Then you can help others in the future as well.
Exactly. So that is the first step. And then, of course, get yourself an attorney that knows their way around this to issue the necessary correspondence, cease and desist, that sort of thing, even before something bad has happened. It often really helps.
I don't want to ever paint the police in a negative light because they are dealing with a reality that few of us kind of can even begin to imagine in this country right now. And this kind of feels like the kind of crime that they are not equipped to deal with. Is that the case? Do we have cyber representation within the police force, and how should we engage with the police when we think something like this has gone wrong?
The Cybercrimes Act is a really good piece of legislation. It deals with a number of, it doesn't define cybercrime narrowly. It deals with interception, access, it deals with distribution. It's very broad.
There is a playbook there, yeah.
We've got a good mechanism. But if we look at some of the statistics, so let's look at 2021. In 2021, Interpol alerted us that we had 230 million instances of cyber threats.
Yeah, before we
They
knew.
alerted us, right? And let's look at 2022. We ranked 5th in the world's list of highest density of cybercrime. And we are estimating across different mechanisms that we are losing about 2 billion, apologies, in damages year on year. This is a big problem.
That's GDP kind of talk, you know?
So in my mind, this is testimony that we don't have enough skilled hands on deck to deal with this. We've got good legislation, but I think we've got a capacity
We need more
issue.
bright minds behind the PCs. This also says to me that those of us in the broadcast and the media space need to take that responsibility on board. How do you think we spread the word without driving fear, without driving panic and paranoia, and educate people? Because, let's be honest, there are going to be, in particular, a lot of elderly people who are living life through that gateway of technology. It's their only way. So how do you advise that we get this message out there and educate the world, ma'am?
Yeah, I think education is definitely the biggest thing. I think if we're looking at elderly people in particular, I do think they often fall victim to this because they aren't as used to dealing with things like this. And I think, look, if you're older and you're not too sure, it's always good to ask. Look, it's always good to, we've always heard, if something's too good to be true, it probably isn't.
100%.
And this goes especially when if you get a random WhatsApp message, something like that. I think like Grant was saying, even like maybe just calling the person immediately, being like, let me just actually just call you and talk to you and make sure, or like video call you, make sure that you're actually who you're saying you are. But just asking like, you know, a niece, a nephew, someone like, look, I received this. Like, is this legit? Like, is this real? Just asking yourself before you just immediately assume and click a link or anything like that. Like, let me actually just double check this. Let me just ask someone first. I think it's the best thing you can do, honestly.
I love that. Speak, educate, and I know there's a lot of tech-savvy elderly people out there. Please, I do this with all due respect. I think we all need to catch up. Maybe I can broaden the perspective here because we've been putting this out to people now. There are so many points of pressure and also new things that we are unlocking with AI at the moment. What has been your biggest kind of discovery through AI? Are you more scared or more excited about where this is taking us?
I was initially very scared. I have now become a lot more excited. And the main reason is that the AI tools are not these generative ones. So these generative ones are like Midjourney and voice cloning, where you create something from nothing. Those for consumer level things are generally quite dangerous. But AI in general it manages to cross a knowledge gap. So I was able to clean, someone spilled milk in my car the other day, and I was able to clean it correctly. I know this sounds random, but
you know how many parents just went, huh, what?
But I was able to clean it properly with the right chemicals that I had at home using AI to do it. So like to prevent it from smelling and all that stuff. I would have taken that to a car cleaner, which was a Sunday, wasn't open. I drove around for like half an hour, trust me, in the rain. And you kind of like, by bridging that knowledge gap, it really does empower you and enable you to do something.
I like that, yeah.
So there are different applications of AI which are scary. The generative ones are generally scary, but the knowledge gap ones are the most exciting ones.
Because that's going to raise the baseline for all of our experience of life. Can we talk about agency within AI? When we are now giving control over something to think on our behalf, when we look at how we are struggling with these first advancements of AI, what makes you most worried from a legal perspective? Because often legislation follows behind. It doesn't create those gateways ahead. But what makes you nervous when you think about AI right now?
So the lawmaker cannot keep up with the speed of the advancement. Let's be frank about that. And that's not a South African challenge. That's a global challenge. All we need to do, basic math, to look at the gaps between the legislative milestone developments in our own country. I mean, we're talking about 7 to 10 years per iteration of legislation. Sometimes more, depends what metric we are.
When you look at how fast things are moving now, that's broken.
And if we look at how fast AI is evolving, I mean, it's a no-brainer. We are not keeping up. And this is not a South African issue, it's a global issue. So if we then look at agency, then we have to look at other jurisdictions. We have to look at what they are doing, what is their response. And remember, those influence can be utilized over here and can be utilized within our court system. So if we look at the US, for example, they have already asked the question, if AI is the disseminator of something that causes damage, who is responsible? That's the key question. And they have found that if you create something using AI, it cannot be IP, trademarked, patented, etc.
Because it kind of comes from all of us, yeah.
Exactly. And secondly, if it causes damage, we have to look for the perpetrator that used the tool. So it's all about the warm body at the end of it. And that's why we're seeing these regulations emerging to check the identity of people you are transacting with if you're in the FICA space, such as law firms. It's becoming interesting.
Take that a step further, and there's an AI deciding whether you're using your money responsibly or not, and then takes over using your money on your behalf because we've given it agency. Well, I suppose that already happens in New York. Okay, I've got one final question for you. You wake up, you sound terrible, you just don't feel like going into work today. You just have your little AI voice, you plug it in, cheers, you don't have to go to work. Would you use an AI representation of yourself to represent yourself in the real world? Have you?
I want to say no. I can see the temptation to do it, especially because you want to keep consistency.
Well, people are doing it with chat, with writing now, so why not?
But I think at the end of the day, especially in my field with radio, I mean, we always want new voices on air. So I think if for some reason I couldn't make it, I'd be happy to someone else take over than instead let this lifeless body sort of give you the news. I'm
going to live 1,000 years. You're going to be sick of my voice, man.
I'm gonna take that a step further. People aren't listening to your voice; they're listening to you. And I think that's the difference. And that's why you pitch up in the morning, for you and your opinion. And Rick Rubin said this recently. He said people won't like AI music because they like what musicians stand for and what the artists stand for. And that's what's important.
I'll give you our edge. We've got thinkers and we've got feelers. Emotional connection is ours, and it's what sets us apart. And you guys are very connected. Thank you so much for opening that window. A little bit terrifying, yes, but how we educate ourselves is vital right now. So have this talk within your families, certainly with your kids, in your workspaces, any of those ecosystems that could be compromised by this kind of specifically fake voice being used to catch people out. Unless we start taking control, something else will.